She laughed at the Duke. Right there, in the middle of the Royal Ballroom, in front of everyone. She was just the maid. He was a duke, and she laughed at him anyway. He was dancing, or trying to. The kind of dancing that happens when a man has never once been told he's wrong about anything. And the music disagrees. His posture, perfect. His confidence, immaculate. His timing, entirely his own. And Goldie Hawn, maid of St. Caro House, standing in the doorway with a tray of candles, watched the whole thing. The laugh escaped before she could stop it. Not a full laugh, not even close to a full laugh, just one sharp, involuntary exhale of pure delight. In the relative quiet of the corridor, it carried. He turned. 3 full seconds. He just looked at her, a duke, and a maid with her hand pressed over her mouth approximately half a second too late. She fully expected to be dismissed. She was not dismissed. The next morning, he called for her, not to reprimand her, not to let her go. He looked at her, with the full weight of a man who had never once asked for anything because everything had simply been provided, and he said,
"Teaching me, in secret."
Subscribe for the full story, and drop a comment. What do you think he asked her? Before you knew it was dancing lessons. There were, by Goldie Hawn's private count, exactly 47 things she would rather be doing than attending to the flower arrangements on the eastern corridor of St. Caro House during a Royal Assembly ball. 43 of those things involved being somewhere else entirely, preferably somewhere with fewer corsets, fewer candelabras, and considerably fewer aristocrats performing the delicate social dance of pretending they didn't know exactly how much money everyone else in the room had lost at cards the previous Tuesday. The remaining 4 things on her list were, in descending order of urgency, eating something warm, finding a chair without a silk cushion that cost more than her monthly wages, writing a letter to her sister back in Dorset, and, most pressingly, not being here, not in London, not in service, not in a life that felt, most days, like a coat borrowed from someone else, technically functional, vaguely presentable, and not even close to the right fit. She was, as her mother had always said with a particular mixture of pride and warning, too observant for her own good. It was this quality, this unfortunate, unkillable habit of noticing things, that caused her to glance through the double doors of the grand ballroom at precisely the wrong moment. Or, depending on how one viewed the subsequent turn of events, precisely the right one. The ballroom was magnificent in the way that only places built to make ordinary people feel small could be. Gold leaf on every surface. Chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen rain. A string quartet in the corner, playing something that suggested both refinement and mild threat. Ladies in gowns the colour of summer gardens. Gentlemen in coats, so perfectly pressed they seemed to have been born wearing them. Already grown, already serious, already absolutely certain of their place in the universe. And then there was the Duke. Duke Barnaby Brooks, 5th of his name, heir to the Dukedom of Avonmore, peer of the realm, confidant of the Crown Prince, possessor of shoulders that no tailor in London had ever adequately explained, was dancing. Goldie would later describe it, to herself and only to herself, as the bravest thing she had ever witnessed. Not because it was good, quite the opposite. It was, objectively, a disaster, not in the loud, obvious, trip over the furniture way that might have generated immediate sympathy. No, the Duke's dancing was a subtler catastrophe, the kind that unfolded in slow, majestic increments, like watching a very expensive ship navigate slowly, but with great confidence into a lighthouse. He moved with perfect conviction. His posture was immaculate. His expression was that of a man who believed, with every fibre of his considerable being, that he was doing exactly what was expected of him. He was not. His timing was off by precisely half a beat, not enough for most of the room to notice immediately, but enough that his partner, Lady Cecilia Fairmont, was visibly recalibrating every third step in the way that only a woman raised from birth to maintain composure under any circumstances could. His left hand kept drifting slightly too high. His turns, when they came, happened at a frequency entirely independent of the music, as though he were dancing to a private composition that only he could hear, one that bore a passing resemblance to the waltz the orchestra was actually playing. The thing that made Goldie laugh, and she would revisit this moment many times in the weeks that followed, analysing exactly where her self-control had failed, was not any single step. It was a specific moment about 2 minutes into the set when the Duke, completing what he clearly believed to be a graceful pivot, accidentally turned the wrong direction, found himself facing the wrong way, and then, with the unshakable dignity of a man who had never in his life admitted to being wrong about anything, simply continued in that direction as though he had planned it all along. The sound escaped her before she could stop it. Not a full laugh, not a cackle, a single, sharp, involuntary exhale of pure delight, the kind that bypasses all social training and arrives in the world with no warning whatsoever. In the relative quiet of the corridor, it carried. The Duke turned, his eyes, dark, sharp, and at present operating at full aristocratic intensity, found her immediately, a housemaid, standing in the doorway with a tray of replacement candles, her hand pressed over her mouth approximately half a second too late, eyes wide with the dawning horror of a person who has just realized that dignity may not be fully recoverable. For 3 full seconds, they looked at each other. Goldie would later note, clinically, that he had remarkable eyes. The observation was purely professional and entirely irrelevant. The Duke's expression did not change. His partner murmured something that drew his attention back, and he turned away. The dance continued. Goldie retreated, very quietly, down the corridor, composed her face with the efficiency of someone who has spent considerable time composing her face in bad situations, and got on with the business of replacing candles. She did not think about it again. Not even once. Not even when she was lying in the dark of the servants' on quarters 3 hours later, staring at the ceiling, replaying the expression on his face and wondering if it had been, just for a fraction of a second, the tiniest bit amused. The request arrived via Mr. Cresswell, the Duke's personal secretary, at 11 o'clock the following morning. Goldie was on her knees cleaning the grate in the blue sitting room when Mrs. Fairwick, the housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with the specific expression she reserved for matters that were either very good or very bad, and she had not yet decided which. Years of observation had taught Goldie that this expression, combined with Mrs. Fairwick's left hand smoothing the front of her apron, indicated something unusual. "His Grace wishes to speak with you," Mrs. Fairwick said, in the tone of someone delivering information that they found personally bewildering. "In the East Study, at your convenience." She paused. "He said at your convenience, which is to say immediately." Goldie set down the brush. She did not panic. She had found, over the past 3 years, that panic was an extremely inefficient response to most situations, and she reserved it for genuine emergencies. A summons to the Duke's study was unusual, possibly concerning, almost certainly connected to the events of the previous evening. But panic, no. She had survived worse than a conversation with a disapproving aristocrat. She tidied herself as best she could, which, given that she had been cleaning grates for the past hour, was a project of limited ambition, and followed Mrs. Fairwick's retreating back through 3 corridors, up 1 staircase, and to the door of the East Study, which was, Goldie had always thought, the most serious room in the house. Dark wood, tall bookshelves, a desk large enough to conduct parliamentary proceedings on, the kind of room that had been specifically designed to make the person who was not sitting behind the desk feel the weight of institutional authority. She knocked. "Come in." She came in. The Duke was standing by the window, which Goldie suspected was a deliberate choice. Standing put him at eye level with her, while simultaneously silhouetted against the light in a way that was probably entirely accidental, and absolutely not designed to make him look architecturally imposing. He was still in his morning coat, which had the effect of making him look like someone who had already made several important decisions today and was about to make several more. "Miss Horn," he said. "Your Grace," she replied. A silence followed. Goldie, who had learned early in life that silence was a weapon most effectively wielded by the person willing to let it run longest, waited. The Duke, she noted, was not a man comfortable with preamble. He cleared his throat once, which seemed to cost him something, and then said, quite directly, "You laughed at me last night." "Yes, Your Grace." She watched him process this. He had, she suspected, expected a denial, or an apology, or possibly both, delivered with considerable volume and an impressive quantity of tears. He had not, clearly, expected simple confirmation. "You are not going to apologize?" he asked. "Would Your Grace like me to apologize?" Another pause. "No," he said, which surprised her. What I would like," he continued, moving from the window with the unhurried deliberation of a man who had thought carefully about his next words and had decided to say them anyway, "is for you to teach me to dance." The room was very quiet. Goldie blinked. "I beg your pardon. The Royal Midsummer Ball is in 3 weeks," the Duke said, as though this explained everything and also nothing. "I will be opening the first set with Lady Ashford in front of the Crown Prince and approximately 400 members of the ton. I am," he paused, and the pause was interesting, the pause of a man doing violence to his own pride. "Not presently at my best, not presently at his best," Goldie thought. What a very elegant way to describe what she had watched last night. What a very, very elegant way. "And you want me to teach you," she said slowly, because you clearly know enough about dancing to recognize when it is being done incorrectly," the Duke said crisply, "and because you have demonstrated an unprecedented willingness to say so. Also," and here something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression, "because you are not Lady Ashford, and you are not any of the 43 people who were in that ballroom last night, and therefore I can be—" Another fractional pause. "Imprecise, in front of you, without consequences." Goldie looked at him for a long moment. She had been looked at many times in her life by many different people, and she had learned to look back with the same careful attention she gave to everything else. What she saw, underneath the perfectly maintained surface of a duke who had not asked for anything in years because everything had simply been provided, was a man who was deeply, quietly embarrassed. And also, and this was the part that surprised her, genuinely asking. Not demanding, not commanding. Asking. "It would need to be in secret," she said. "Entirely," he agreed. "And it would need to be on my schedule, around my duties. Within reason. And," she added, because she was from Dorset and because she had not travelled all this way and survived all she had survived to be walked over by men in expensive coats, "if I am going to correct you, I will need to actually correct you, without you taking it as an affront to your person." The Duke's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are setting terms." "I am establishing expectations, Your Grace. I find it saves time." He was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time since she had entered the room, something in his face relaxed almost imperceptibly. Not a smile, not quite, but the nearest neighbour to one. "Very well," he said. "Tomorrow evening. The old library. 7 o'clock. I'll bring the candles," Goldie said, because she was already in charge of the candles and because it seemed like the kind of thing that would be useful to say. She turned to leave. "Miss Horn." She paused. "Tell no one," he said. "Your Grace," she replied, turning her head just enough to be understood. "I haven't told anyone anything in 3 years. I'm not about to start now." She closed the door behind her with the quiet efficiency of someone who had just agreed to something she could not entirely explain and had decided to think about the implications later, possibly when she was somewhere less imposing. In the corridor, She allowed herself exactly 4 seconds of private consideration. Then she smoothed her apron, picked up her candle tray from where she had left it by the door, and got on with the day. 3 weeks, she thought. She could manage 3 weeks. She had managed considerably worse. The old library at St. Caro House was, technically, a library. It contained bookshelves along 3 of its 4 walls, and those bookshelves contained books, which did make a strong case for the classification. However, it had not, to Goldie's knowledge, been used for active reading in some years, and its primary function now seemed to be the storage of slightly damaged furniture, an impressive collection of rolled maps, and the quiet accumulation of the kind of domestic mystery, mismatched candlesticks, a single dropped glove, a painting wrapped in cloth facing the wall, that gathers in any large house's underused rooms. It was also, crucially, on the east wing's far corridor, separated from the guest quarters by 2 closed doors, and accessible from both the main hall and the servants' passage. Whoever had been using it for secret purposes in previous centuries had chosen well. Goldie arrived at 2 minutes past 7, because she had intended to arrive at 7 exactly, but had been stopped by Mrs. Fairwick on the stairs with a question about the Tuesday linens, and had spent those 2 minutes constructing elaborate alternatives to the explanation, "I am going to the old library to teach the Duke to dance," which was not, she felt, a sentence that would survive social contact. The Duke was already there, standing in the centre of the cleared floor space, with his hands clasped behind his back and the expression of a man attending a meeting he had called himself and was already second-guessing. 2 candelabras had been positioned to provide adequate light. Someone, presumably the Duke, although the image was difficult to fully reconcile, had moved the furniture to the walls. "You're late," he said. 2 minutes, Goldie said. "Mrs. Fairwick." "Ah," he said, as if this explained everything, because it did. Goldie set down her small bag. She had brought a few items of practical use, including a length of ribbon she was going to use to mark positions on the floor if this looked like it was going to be necessary, which she suspected it would be, and surveyed the Duke with the professional attention she gave to any problem she was being asked to solve. He was tall. She had known this in the abstract, but proximity clarified it. He was also less formally arranged than she had ever seen him, coat still on, because of course, but without the full ceremonial posture of Duke in a room where things are being decided. He was just standing there, waiting, with the faintly uncomfortable air of someone who had paid for a service and was now uncertain whether the service was going to work. "Have you had any lessons before?" she asked. "When I was 12. They were not," he said carefully, "successful." "Why not?" He seemed surprised to be asked. The instructor had very specific ideas about how things should be done, and I had a small pause. Different ideas. "And your ideas were wrong," Goldie said. "My ideas," he said with great dignity, "were also wrong, yes." She did not smile. She was already learning to not smile at things he said, which was going to be important. "All right," she said, moving to the centre of the floor. "Stand here." She pointed to a spot approximately 2 feet in front of her. He moved to it without protest, which she noted. "Now, show me what you think a waltz looks like." "I beg your pardon." "The waltz. Show me what you think it is. Don't worry about doing it correctly. I want to see what you're doing now before we talk about what you should be doing instead." The Duke looked at her for a moment with an expression that suggested he was calculating whether there was any version of this request that allowed him to maintain dignity. He concluded. She could see that there was not. He adjusted his posture, extended his arm in the approximate direction of a waltz hold, and began. Goldie watched in professional silence. He was not, she decided, as bad as she had first thought. There were the bones of something in there, a genuine awareness of the music in his head, real physical capability, good posture. The problems were specific. He was leading with his body rather than his frame, which caused him to drift, and he was counting beats in a way that made him exactly half a measure behind the actual music whenever a transition happened, like a man who had memorized the words to a song, but in the wrong key. She watched for 30 seconds. Then she said, "Stop." He stopped. "You're not terrible," she said. He blinked. "That is a surprising opening. I thought you'd appreciate accuracy over comfort." "I do," he said, somewhat cautiously, as if he was not entirely sure this was true. "You have 3 problems," Goldie said, moving toward him with the specific purposefulness of someone who knows what they are doing and is not going to apologize for it. "Your frame collapses when you turn. Your count is off at every phrase change. And you are trying to anticipate what your partner is going to do instead of leading her clearly enough that she doesn't need to think about it." She paused to let this land. "The third one," she continued, "is actually the most important. A man who dances well doesn't drag his partner through the steps. He makes it so obvious where they're going that she arrives there before she's consciously decided to move." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "That's rather," he began. "Poetic. Yes, also practical." She held out her hand. "Shall we start?" He took her hand. His grip was careful, not the easy, unconscious grip of a man who had danced 1,000 times, but the deliberate grip of a man making sure he had it right, which in its way told her something. "Good," she said. "Now, we're going to go very slowly, and when I say stop, you stop. When I say go, you go, and when I correct you, you will not take it as a personal affront to your lineage. I make no promises," he said. But there was something in it that was almost, just barely, the shadow of a joke. Goldie looked up at him. He was closer than she had thought, which was simply a consequence of correct dance hold and not a thing she was going to think about. "Ready?" she said. "No," he said, with complete honesty. "Good," she said. "That's the right answer. Go." The second lesson happened 2 days later, a Tuesday, at 8:30 in the evening, when the rest of the house was engaged with dinner guests in the front rooms, and the old library was as private as it ever got. The Duke arrived first this time. He had also, Goldie noticed, moved the furniture himself again, which meant he had been in this room at some point during the day arranging things. She did not mention this. He was better. Not dramatically better, not the kind of transformation that happens in stories, overnight and complete, but measurably better. He had been practicing, which she could tell not because he said so. He did not say so, but because the specific problem with his frame, the collapse on the left side that she had identified and described with some precision, had improved by about 40%. He had been working on it alone, without music, probably in his bedroom where no one could see him. This information, filed under "Things I am not going to think about," went into the same folder as the grip of his hand and the fact that he'd laughed, briefly, at one of her corrections during the first lesson, and it had changed his face entirely. "Your left side," she said, adjusting the frame. Her hands were steady. She was a professional. "I hold it like you're pushing a door open that you know is heavy." "That's a strange image," he said. "Does it work?" He set the frame. It was better. "Yes," he admitted. "One strange images often do." The third lesson ran long, past the agreed time, because they were working on the phrase change, the moment in the music where the waltz shifted and his count fell apart. And Goldie, who did not leave problems unsolved when they were so close to yielding, kept finding one more thing to try. The Duke did not object. At some point she realized it was past 10 o'clock, and the house was quiet, and she was standing in a candlelit room with a Duke who had just, finally, gotten through an entire section of the waltz without losing the beat. And he was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a ready category for. "That was it," she said, because it was, and because the observation was purely practical. "Yes," he agreed, and then, "Where did you learn?" The question arrived without warning, the way his questions tended to. Direct, unhurried, not particularly interested in the social conventions that usually buffered this kind of inquiry. "My mother," Goldie said. which was true and also not the whole answer, and she suspected he knew both things. "Where is she now?" "Gone," Goldie said. The word arrived in the room with its full weight. He didn't say he was sorry. She appreciated that. Sorry was a word people reached for when they didn't know what else to hold, and she had heard it enough times to be tired of its lightness. Instead, he said, "Was she from London?" "Dorset," Goldie said. "I'm from Dorset." "What brought you to London?" She looked at him. He met the look with the patient attention of a man who had discovered, sometime in the past 2 weeks, that the answers to his questions were going to be interesting. "A decision," she said simply. "The kind you make when staying puts you in more danger than leaving." She expected him to press. He didn't. "I see," he said. And the thing that stayed with her afterward was that she believed he did. The fourth lesson included the moment she would, later, identify as the one where things had shifted from a useful arrangement to something else, though at the time she filed it as nothing in particular, because she was very good at filing things. He had been attempting the turn sequence, 3 rotations that needed to happen in a specific window of the music, and he had gotten through 2 of them correctly, which was progress, and then on the third he had simply stopped, mid-rotation, and looked at her with an expression of genuine exasperation, and said, "This is genuinely the most humbling experience of my adult life." "More humbling than the assembly ball?" she asked. "At the assembly ball, I didn't know I was failing," he said. "This is active failure. It's much worse." Goldie considered this. "It's also progress," she said. "You can only improve what you can see." "Is that from somewhere?" "From me," she said. "Just now." He looked at her for a moment, with an expression she would, if pressed, have described as something between consideration and recognition. The look of a person encountering something they had not anticipated and were deciding what to do about it. Then he said, "Again," and they went again, and this time he got all 3 rotations. Goldie did not cheer. She maintained her composure in the way that she always maintained her composure, which was to say with effort and practice and the firm application of practicality to sentiment. What she said was, "There, you have it." What she thought was something else entirely, something she tucked away quickly and efficiently and did not examine. The letters to her sister in Dorset had been getting shorter. She hadn't worked out why. The 7th lesson happened on a Thursday night in early June, when the London rain arrived, with the specific determination of weather that has decided it is going to make a point. It hammered against the high windows of the old library, turned the candlelight watery and close, and reduced the world outside to nothing but the drumming of water and the occasional distant rumble of a carriage retreating somewhere sensible. They were working on something beyond the mechanics now. Goldie had decided, during the previous lesson, that the Duke understood the steps. What he did not yet understand was what dancing was actually for. "You're still thinking about your feet," she said. "My feet are important. The success of this entire enterprise depends on my feet. Your feet know what to do. You've made them learn it. Stop watching them and look at me." He raised his eyes from the floor. The candlelight was particularly inconsiderate this evening, Goldie thought, in terms of the way it was behaving near the particular arrangement of his face. "Now dance," she said, "and don't think about the steps." "Then what should I think about?" She considered the question genuinely. "The other person," she said. "Dancing is a conversation. You're saying something to your partner. What are you trying to say?" He was quiet for a moment, which with the Duke meant he was thinking rather than stalling. "That they're safe," he said finally, which was not the answer she had expected and which landed somewhere specific in her chest. "That I have them, that they don't need to worry about where we're going." Goldie looked at him. "Then do that," she said softly. They danced. The rain carried on. The candles burned down. And this time, something was different. She felt it in the way the lead came through his frame, the way the space between them acquired a kind of intention. She was not thinking about whether his count was right. She was not thinking about his feet or his frame or the position of his left hand. She was just moving, and he was moving with her. And outside, the rain was saying something to the windows, and inside the fire was saying something to the dark, and neither of them said anything for a long time after the music that only they could hear had finished. It was Barnaby who spoke first. "Tell me about Dorset," he said, which was not what she had expected. He was not looking at her with the professional attention of the first lesson. He was looking at her differently, the way you look at someone when you have stopped pretending you are not interested in what they say next. And Goldie, who had not talked about Dorset to anyone in London, not once, not in 3 years, found herself talking. She told him about the cliffs, the white ones, in the morning, when the light came off the sea in a way that made everything look like it had been washed clean. She told him about her mother's kitchen, the smell of it, the warmth of it, the way the floor always slanted slightly to the left near the hearth, because the house had been settling for 200 years and had no plans to stop. She told him about the school where her father had taught, before, the rows of wooden desks and the smell of chalk, and the way her father's voice could make even the driest geography feel like a story. She did not tell him about what had happened after. Not yet. But she told him more than she had told anyone in years, and he listened the way he did everything, with full, quiet attention, without interrupting, without trying to solve anything. And it was that quality of being entirely listened to, that she filed, quickly, very quickly, in a folder labelled nothing in particular. "Why London?" he asked when she had finished. There are things in Dorset I needed distance from," she said. "London is the furthest from the sea you can get and still be in England." "And now?" he asked. "Do you want to stay?" She had an answer ready. She had always had an answer ready. "I have a plan," she said. "I'm saving. When I have enough, I'm going to Bristol. There's a school there, a proper one, that takes teachers who don't have connections or papers, just ability. My father's old friend runs it. He wrote to me a year ago." She paused. "He said there would always be a place for me if I wanted it." Barnaby was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like a good plan," he said. "It is a good plan," she agreed, and she meant it entirely, and she was not at all confused by the small, sharp feeling underneath the certainty. "How long until you have enough?" he asked. 3 months, she said. Maybe 4. She watched him receive this information. He did not react visibly. He simply nodded once, slowly, and looked at the window where the rain was still making its point. "We should practice the opening," he said after a moment. "The first 8 bars need to be strong. The rest follows from them." "Yes," Goldie said. She was very good at filing things. It was, of all people, Mrs. Fairwick who noticed first. Not about the lessons. Those remained undetected, protected by the old library's geography and the general invisibility that was, in Goldie's experience, one of the only reliable privileges of domestic service. No, what Mrs. Fairwick noticed was something else, that Goldie had stopped talking about Bristol. She mentioned this on a Wednesday morning over the household account books, with the specific gentleness of a woman who has been running large houses long enough to recognise weather patterns in people. "You haven't mentioned Mr. Calloway's school in some weeks," Mrs. Fairwick said, not looking up from the accounts. "I'm still saving," Goldie said. "I know," Mrs. Fairwick said, still not looking up. "And I also know that you have enough, as of last month's wages, if you were being frugal about it." Goldie said nothing. Mrs. Fairwick closed the account book. She looked at Goldie with the expression of a woman who had survived 30 years in great houses by seeing exactly what was in front of her. "You are a sensible girl," she said. "You have been sensible in ways that most people your age never manage, and sensible people sometimes mistake habit for wisdom. Mrs. Fairwick." "I am saying nothing," the housekeeper said firmly. I am merely noting that the accounts suggest you could leave if you chose to. Whether you choose to is your business entirely. She opened the account book again. The linens from Tuesday are still in the drying room. You might see to them. Goldie saw to the linens. She also, for the first time since her conversation with Mr. Calloway's letter, sat with the question of why she hadn't written back yet. She had written the letter 3 times in her head. She had composed it on the walk between the drying room and the second corridor upstairs. She knew what it should say. She had simply not yet sent it. With 1 week to the midsummer ball, the Duke danced like a man who had learned something true about it. Not perfectly. There was still, in moments of distraction, a tendency for his count to slip and for his frame to soften, but with a quality that had nothing to do with mechanics. He danced the way she had been trying to explain to him since the 3rd lesson, with intention, with the particular gravity of a person who knows what they are saying and means every word. Goldie, standing across from him in the old library, with the familiar candles burning down and the familiar dark outside and the familiar feeling of being somewhere she had not expected to need, found that she was no longer thinking about the lesson. She was thinking about the fact that in 1 week the lessons would be over. She was thinking about the fact that she had not written to Mr. Calloway. She was thinking about the fact that she had begun, sometime in the past 3 weeks, without any specific decision or moment she could point to look forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays with the particular anticipation that she used to reserve for letters from her sister. She was also, since she was committed to honesty, if only in private, thinking about the Duke, Barnaby. She had begun, in the privacy of her own thoughts, to think of him as Barnaby, which was a thing she would not permit herself to do anywhere outside of the privacy of her own thoughts, but which she could not seem to stop. Goldie, he said. He had started using her name several lessons ago, a small shift she had catalogued and not addressed. You've stopped correcting me. You've stopped making mistakes, she said. I still make mistakes. Not the kind that need correcting tonight. They continued to dance. The fire had burned to coals. At some point, the music in their heads arrived at its natural end, and they slowed and stopped and were standing in the particular closeness of ended dancing where neither person has yet stepped back. Barnaby looked at her. What happens after the ball? He asked. Your Grace performs admirably, I presume, she said, which was not what he had asked, and they both knew it. I mean what happens to your plan, he said. Bristol. Mr. Calloway's school. I haven't written yet, she said, before she could stop herself. I know, he said quietly. I noticed. She looked at him properly, the way she had been not doing all evening. He was looking at her with the same directness he gave to everything, the same full, patient, undeflected attention that had, she realized, been aimed at her consistently and unreservedly since about the 3rd lesson. I haven't written, she said slowly, because I'm not certain anymore. About the school. About leaving. The word sat in the room between them with all its weight. Barnaby said nothing for a moment. Then, tell me what you're uncertain about. I don't think I should, Goldie said. Why? Why not? Because, she said carefully, there are things that are possible to say and things that are not, and I think I'm standing very close to the line between them, and I think the sensible thing is to stay on the right side of it. I disagree, he said, and his voice was different, lower, quieter, with none of the careful formality that had characterized the first 2 weeks. I think the sensible thing is to say what is true, regardless of which side of the line it puts you on. Your Grace. Barnaby, he said. You've been calling me Barnaby in your head for at least 2 weeks. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. She stared at him. You cannot possibly know that. I know it, he said, simply, because I've been doing the same thing. The fire had gone entirely to coals now. The candles were very low. Outside, London carried on with the relentless indifference of a city that does not pause for small, private moments in candlelit rooms. I am a housemaid, Goldie said. You are a duke. I am a man who cannot dance, he said, who is standing in a room with the person who taught him that it matters, and I am asking her to tell me the truth. She looked at him for a long moment. The truth, she said finally, slowly, as though testing each word before she committed to it, is that I came to London to disappear, and somewhere in the past 3 weeks I have started wanting to be found. Barnaby's hand, which had remained in the proper dance hold throughout this conversation, with the particular stubbornness of a man using structure to hold something together, moved. Very slightly. The way things move when they shift from form to feeling. Then let me find you, he said. Goldie took a breath. Then she said, with the honesty she had promised herself she would maintain at all costs, whatever the cost, it's more complicated than that. Tell me. And so she told him. About Dorset, about what had happened after, the real after, the one she hadn't shared in the old library the night it rained. A name she had been running from, a man her father had owed money to, who had decided after her father died that the debt transferred to her in a different and more personal currency. The kind of man who had connections in Dorset and not yet in London, which was why London, which was why service, which was why invisible. She told him all of it, watching his face as she did, watching the careful stillness of it, the quality of attention that she had first noticed in a ballroom and had been filing as nothing in particular ever since. When she finished, he was very quiet. This man, he said, with a specific gentleness that was nowhere near as gentle as it sounded, has connections in Dorset. Yes, and not in London, not yet. Her voice was steady. That's the only reason I'm still here. Goldie, he said, I am the Duke of Avonmore. I have connections everywhere, and I can make this man a problem he will not recover from, quietly, and in ways that will cost you nothing. She looked at him. That is not, I know it's not why you would stay, he said. I'm not offering it as a reason to stay. I'm offering it as the removal of a reason to leave. He paused. While what you do after that is entirely your own. The old library was very quiet. Why would you do that? She asked, though she suspected, and suspected that he knew she suspected, because, he said, I spent 3 years not knowing that I couldn't dance. And 2 weeks ago, a housemaid in a corridor laughed at me. And in the weeks since then, she has corrected me, challenged me, told me difficult truths without softening them, and listened to me in a way that no one has managed since my mother died when I was 19. He paused. And I find that I would very much prefer a world in which she exists freely in it, whether she chooses Bristol or London or anywhere else. Goldie Hawn, who had managed almost everything with the efficient application of sense and the stubborn maintenance of her own interior climate, found that her eyes were doing something she had not authorized. She blinked it back. Mostly. You are, she said, with great care and the remnants of composure, the most unexpected person I have met in my entire life. I am reliably informed, he said. And the thing that was almost a smile was now fully present. And it was, she noted, the kind of smile that rearranged things, that I am quite strange. Strange, she agreed, and then, because there was a line between possible and impossible, and she had been standing at it all evening, and it turned out not to be where she had thought it was. Barnaby. It was the first time she had said it aloud. He heard it the way you hear something you have been quietly hoping for without quite letting yourself know it. Yes, he said softly. I'm not going to Bristol yet, she said. I'm going to write to Mr. Calloway and tell him I need a little more time. How much time? He asked, and there was something careful in it and something hopeful. I don't know, she said, honestly. Enough to see how something goes. That, Barnaby said, seems like a reasonable plan. It is a terrible plan, she said. I have no idea what I'm doing. Neither do I, he admitted. But I've recently been told that the only way to get better at something is to do it without knowing what you're doing until you do. That sounds like something someone very wise said. "A housemaid of my acquaintance," he said. "Extremely good at dancing, remarkably good at correcting people, impossible to dismiss." Goldie looked at him. He looked back. Outside, London carried on. Inside, the very last candle burned down to nothing, and the old library became entirely what it had quietly been for the past 3 weeks. Not a library at all, but the room where something had begun. The Royal Midsummer Ball at Carlton House was, by universal consent of everyone who attended it, a triumph. The flowers were magnificent. The wine was appropriate. The string quartet had apparently been selected on the basis of actual musical ability rather than social connection, which was noted and appreciated. The Crown Prince was in good humour. Lady Ashford wore a gown that generated 12 separate conversations about its provenance. Lord Whitmore said something quietly devastating to Lord Carver in the East Corridor that would take 3 weeks to fully unspool across the ton. And Duke Barnaby Brooks opened the first set of the evening. He had been in this ballroom many times. He knew its proportions precisely: the height of the ceiling, the distance from the entrance to the floor, the specific acoustics that made the orchestra sound like it was coming from inside your own chest rather than from the corner. He knew how the candlelight moved across the gold leaf when the dancers turned. He knew, with the bone-deep familiarity of a man who had spent his adult life in rooms exactly like this one, how to walk into it and belong. What he had not known before 7 lessons in a candlelit library with a woman from Dorset who laughed at inconvenient moments and refused to soften anything, was that belonging was not the same thing as being present. He walked to the floor. The orchestra began. Lady Ashford took his offered hand with a small, practiced smile. The room arranged itself around them the way it always did, at attention, performing casual interest, watching the Duke open the ball with the quiet expectation of something correct and unmemorable. Barnaby took his frame, set it the way he had set it 50 times in the old library, the way Goldie had corrected on the 3rd lesson, with her hands steady and her voice even and her eyes absolutely unimpressed by rank. The way that held, the way that led. And then the music arrived in his chest the way it had started arriving, sometime around the 5th lesson, not as a count to track, but as a thing to respond to, like a conversation already in progress. He danced. The phrase change came. He felt it a half beat before it arrived, felt the music shift its weight, and moved with it instead of after it, the way she had told him to, the way he had finally understood she meant not as instruction, but as invitation. Lady Ashford followed without thinking, which was, he knew now, the whole point. Not to manage a partner, to make it so obvious where you were going that she arrived before she had decided to. He had been thinking, for the past 3 weeks, about what he was saying when he danced. At the assembly ball, he had been saying nothing. He had been executing a sequence with the grim determination of a man who had memorized the words to a speech in a language he did not speak. There had been no meaning in it, only effort, and the audience had felt the absence of meaning even if they couldn't name it. Tonight, he was saying something. He was saying, "I have you. I know where we are going. You don't have to think about anything except being here." It was, he recognized, what he had been wanting to say to a specific person in a candlelit library for the better part of 3 weeks. The dance was simply the clearest language he had currently available. At the turn of the 2nd phrase, the music opened up into the full rotation. His frame held. His timing held. Lady Ashford moved in the lead as though she had chosen to be exactly there, which was how it was supposed to feel. The room watched. Barnaby looked up. The upper gallery was in partial shadow. The household staff of several families were seated there in the dignified invisibility that domestic service required, and he knew, without being able to explain how he knew it, exactly where she was. He found her in the shadow of the gallery rail. He couldn't see her expression clearly from the floor. He didn't need to. He had spent enough time in close rooms with her face to know what it looked like when something landed. He looked back at the floor. He completed the rotation. He danced the last phrase to its proper end. Something in him, which had been quietly taught for the entirety of his adult life, the way a string holds tension so long it forgets what looseness is. Released. He had done it. Not the dance. The dance was almost beside the point now. He had learned, in 3 weeks of honest correction and difficult truth, and 1 night of rain, something he had not known he was missing. He had learned to be seen, to be imprecise in front of someone, to lead not because he was required to, but because he meant it. The last note arrived. The room applauded with the warm, polite approval of people who had witnessed something correct, and also, though they could not have said why, something genuine. Barnaby made his bow to Lady Ashford, who smiled at him with something slightly warmer than her usual social precision and said, quietly, that she had not enjoyed a set so much in years. He thanked her. He meant it. And then he began, with the specific patience of a man who has learned that some things are worth moving carefully toward, to navigate across the room. From the upper gallery, Goldie watched. She watched him walk out. She watched the room rearrange itself. She watched him take his frame with the particular set of the left shoulder that she had corrected 17 times, and that now, under the full chandeliers of Carlton House, in front of 400 members of the ton and 1 crown prince, was perfect. Goldie's hands, folded in her lap with complete composure, tightened. It was good, not perfect. She could see the half-beat at the phrase, change, the tiny recalibration that no one else in the room would notice, but that she recognized because she had watched him work through it across 6 different evenings. But after that, it was genuinely good. Better than good. It was the dance of a man who had stopped counting and started meaning it. Lady Ashford, she noticed, had stopped recalibrating. She was simply dancing, which meant he was leading her clearly enough that she didn't have to think. Goldie felt something rise in her chest that she had no ready category for, and that she was, for once, entirely disinclined to file away. She had done this. She had watched a man who couldn't find a beat with both hands and a map become someone who could hold a partner safe in a room full of people watching for any weakness. She had been the only person in London who knew the whole distance he had travelled, and she was the only person watching who understood what tonight actually cost and what it actually meant. At the turn of the second phrase, he looked up. She looked back. She allowed herself, in the dark of the upper gallery with no one watching and the music covering everything, exactly one real smile. Not the composed, functional expression she maintained in the general course of her days. The actual thing. The one she had been not smiling in the old library for 3 weeks running. He had it. He had genuinely, completely got it. And she had helped him get it. Which was, she realized, what she had always wanted to do with her life. Not dance at balls, not serve at them, teach. Help someone find the thing they couldn't reach alone and watch them reach it. The thought arrived with the clarity of something that has been true for a long time and has finally found its words. She was going to write to Mr. Calloway. She was going to tell him yes, not instead of this, not in place of whatever this was, but alongside it. Because she was a woman who was capable of wanting more than one true thing at once, and she had wasted enough time pretending otherwise. The applause came. She did not join it. She was too busy sitting with what she had just understood. For the first time in 3 years, she was not running towards something or away from something. She was simply here, in a room that was not hers, watching a man who was not categorizable, feeling something she had stopped trying to name. It was, she decided, a reasonable place to be. He found her an hour after the set, in the side corridor behind the east entrance, which she had identified on arrival as the most likely route for a person who needed to move between the gallery and the service access without being seen. She was already wearing her cloak, which suggested she had been in the process of leaving. He had the expression of a man who had just been complimented in warm and specific terms by a crown prince, and had spent the following 45 minutes navigating a ballroom full of people who all wanted a moment of his attention, each of whom he had managed with the smooth efficiency of someone whose thoughts were entirely elsewhere. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped when she saw him. That, she said into the quiet of the corridor, was very good. You saw it, he said. I saw it. The phrase change in the second section. Was fine. You recovered. No one noticed. You noticed. I don't count, she said. You count, he said, with the directness that was, she had decided some weeks ago, one of the most consistently disarming things about him, more than anyone else in the room, which is why I looked. The corridor was quiet. Distantly, the orchestra had moved to the next set. The sound came through the walls like something belonging to a different world entirely. Your Grace, Goldie began, because they were at Carlton House and there were 200 people 30 feet away. I have something to tell you, he said, which stopped her. About Dorset. She went still. His name was Aldous Crewe, Barnaby said, and Goldie felt something cold move through her at the sound of it spoken plainly in a lit corridor, without whisper or fear. The name she had carried like a stone in her pocket for 3 years. He held a debt against your father's estate. After your father died, he redirected that claim toward you in ways that were not legal, not acceptable, and not, as of last Wednesday, any longer his to pursue. What did you do? She asked. Her voice was steady. She had learned steadiness the hard way. I purchased the debt, Barnaby said, at full value, through an intermediary, with a legal instrument that transfers ownership entirely and extinguishes all associated claims. He received his money. He received a separate letter from my solicitor outlining the precise legal consequences of any further contact with you or your family. And he received, the almost smile arrived, brief and precise, a third document from a justice of the peace in his county, reminding him of several outstanding matters the Crown has been meaning to address regarding his conduct over the past decade, which have coincidentally been brought to official attention this week. Goldie stared at him. You did all of that, she said, in 7 days. I had motivation, he said simply. She was quiet for a moment. 3 years of sleeping lightly. 3 years of never using her full name in any public record. 3 years of London as a hiding place rather than a home. She had carried the weight of it so long that she had stopped noticing it was there, the way you stop noticing a sound once it becomes constant. It was gone. She blinked, rapidly, once. That is, she said, with great care, the most significant thing anyone has ever done for me. It required very little effort on my part, he said, which she knew was a lie and which she appreciated in the way you appreciate a lie told out of kindness rather than convenience. Barnaby, she said. Yes, he said. I wrote to Mr. Calloway today, she said. Before the ball. I told him yes. Something shifted in his face. Not disappointment, she thought, but the careful arrangement of a man receiving information he had not expected. I see, he said. I told him yes, she continued, and I told him that I would need until spring, that there are things I need to resolve here first, things I need to understand. She paused. But he wrote back by the afternoon post. I received it before we left, and he said spring was perfectly suitable. The careful arrangement in his face became something else. Spring, he said. 6 months, she said, which is enough time to understand things. And if, in 6 months, he said, slowly, as though building the sentence as he went, the things that need understanding have been understood. What then? Does Goldie Hawn go to Bristol and become a teacher? Goldie Hawn becomes a teacher regardless, she said, with the calm certainty of someone who has made a decision and means it. That is not the question. What is the question? The question is whether, she said, Goldie Hawn goes to Bristol alone. The corridor was very quiet. Barnaby looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. Outside, London was London, indifferent, enormous, carrying on. I have a confession, he said finally. Only one. I have been, he said, for the past 3 months, learning things. Not dancing. Other things. He paused. I have been learning what it is to be honest with someone, to be imprecise, to say a difficult thing and have it received without judgment, to be corrected. The almost smile was fully present now, without taking it as an affront to my lineage. You've improved, she said, considerably. He was serious now, or as serious as he ever was when the smile was still in his eyes. I have also been learning what it is to think about a person constantly, to find that conversations I have with other people keep arriving, somehow, at her, to walk into the old library on days when there is no lesson and stand there for a moment because it is, he paused, where she has been. Goldie did not say anything. She was very good at not saying things, and she was currently applying that skill at full capacity. I don't know what a duke and a housemaid look like in 6 months, he said. I am aware that the world has opinions on the subject, and that those opinions are numerous and inconvenient. I also know that I have recently learned that the limits of possible are considerably further than I thought, and that I learned this from a woman who has not, in my experience, ever told me anything untrue. He took a single step toward her, not crowding, offering. I would very much like, he said quietly, to be part of the understanding. If you'll have me. Goldie looked at him. She thought about the old library and the rain and the way he listened. She thought about the letter in her pocket from Mr. Calloway that said spring. She thought about Dorset and the name she no longer needed to fear. She thought about the curtain in the blue sitting room that she had not yet finished. She thought about the way the last 3 months had felt, which was like finding solid ground somewhere she had not expected it. I have a condition, she said. Name it. When I go to Bristol, not if, when, you don't ask me not to. I would never, he said. And she believed him entirely. And when I come back, she continued, watching his face, because I intend to come back, you are still here. I will be here, he said, in whatever capacity you need, for as long as you want it. She nodded once. Then she reached out and took his hand, which was not what housemaids did with dukes in corridors at Carlton House, and was entirely what she intended to do. He looked down at her hand in his, then at her face. Miss Horne, he said softly. And there was something in it that was both the formality and the opposite of it. The word used not to create distance, but to mark, with the care he gave to precise things, the significance of the moment. Your Grace, she said. And then, because 6 months was a long time and she had already waited 3 years for her life to feel like her own, and she was not inclined to wait any further for things she had decided to want, she stood up slightly on the balls of her feet and kissed him. It was brief. It was entirely intentional. It lasted long enough to be unambiguous and short enough to be something they would both think about for the next 6 months. When she stepped back, his expression was the one she had been cataloguing since the 3rd lesson. The one she had never quite had a category for. She had one now. Go back to the ball, she said. You have sets to dance and a crown prince to impress. Yes, he said. He had not let go of her hand. I'll be thorough about it. I know, she said. You're thorough about everything. She retrieved her hand. She straightened her cloak. She gave him one last look, the actual look, not the composed professional one. And then she turned and walked toward the service door. Goldie, he said, behind her. She paused without turning. Spring, he said. Spring, she agreed. She went out into the London night. It was cooler than she expected and smelled of rain that had fallen earlier in the evening and horse and wood smoke and the particular aliveness of a city that never fully sleeps. She walked home. In the kitchen at St. Caro House, by the warmth of the banked fire, she sat for a long moment. Then she took out her writing things and wrote 2 letters. The first was to her sister in Dorset. There is something I need to tell you, she wrote. His name is Barnaby. He is a duke, which I acknowledge sounds like the beginning of a very bad idea. I will explain when I see you, which will be soon. because there is no longer anything keeping me from Dorset except the distance, and I have been managing that for 3 years, and can manage it a little longer. The second letter was to Mr. Calloway. She told him yes, and spring, and that she would arrive ready to work. She told him she had been teaching, in the interim, and had found that she was good at it. She told him she was bringing herself and her full attention, and 3 years of having learned what it meant to need something and work for it. She sealed both letters. She set them with the Morning Post. Then she went upstairs and looked out at the London dark and thought about a man who had been a disaster in a ballroom and a revelation in a library. She thought about a name she no longer needed to carry. She thought about Bristol in spring and a school with real students and her father's voice making geography sound like a story. She thought about a corridor at Carlton House and a hand and a kiss that had lasted long enough to mean something. It meant, she thought, that she had stopped running. Not because she had found a place to stop. She had always known, somewhere underneath the practicality, that stopping was not a place you found but a decision you made. She had made it. Sometime in a candlelit library, or on a rain-loud Thursday, or in a gallery watching a man she had taught look up to find her, she had made it. She was going to Bristol. She was going to teach. She was going to come back. She was, she thought, going to be very all right. The letter from Mr. Calloway confirming her first class arrived on a Tuesday in March, which was, Goldie had long since decided, the most consequential day of the week. She read it at the kitchen table with her tea going cold and the early spring light coming through the window at the particular angle that made everything look possible, which was the kind of light that March produced when it was in a good mood, and she had learned to take it seriously. The position was confirmed. A classroom of 14 students, ages 8 to 12. A salary, a small room above the school that was hers. A start date of the first Monday in April. 3 weeks. She folded the letter. She put it in the wooden box under her bed where she kept the things she was not yet done with, next to the letter from her sister and a small pressed flower from a window box that she had not been able to explain keeping and had kept anyway. Then she went to find Barnaby. He was in the East Study, which was where he did the majority of his actual work, the kind that involved the running of an estate and the management of considerable assets and the various responsibilities that fell to a man of his position, none of which, she had noticed over 6 months of proximity, he treated as a burden. He was at the desk. He looked up when she came in. She held up the letter. He looked at it, then at her. April, she said. I know, he said. He had known the general shape of the timing for weeks. This was one of the things about him. He prepared. He had been preparing for this, the way he had prepared for the midsummer ball, carefully, thoroughly, and with the particular quiet of a person who intends to be ready when the moment comes. He came around the desk. He stood in front of her in the East Study, where she had stood 6 months ago on the receiving end of the most unexpected request of her life, and he looked at her with the full, unhurried attention that had been, she now understood, the thing that had undone her from the beginning. Bristol, he said. Bristol, she confirmed. And back, he said. Not a question, a statement of something already agreed, already real. And back, she said. Champ for the school holidays. And when the term ends, and she paused, because there was something else she had decided, in the long private arithmetic of the past 6 months, and she had been carrying it in the same pocket as the Mr. Calloway letter, and she had decided, done carrying things. And for as long as you want me to come back. Barnaby looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the directness he gave to everything that mattered, I will want you to come back for the rest of my life. I want to be plain about that, so that there is no ambiguity on the subject. There is no ambiguity, she said. There hasn't been since approximately the 5th lesson. I was simply taking my time about saying it. You were organizing your thoughts, he said. I was organizing my thoughts, she agreed. He smiled then, the full one, the one that still, after 6 months, rearranged things, and reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair back, with the careful deliberateness of a man who has been wanting to do that specific thing for considerably longer than is entirely dignified. "Goldie," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have a question," he said. "Do." "And I want you to know that whatever the answer is, I have already decided that it will not change anything I have just said. I am asking because I am interested in the answer, not because it is conditional." She looked at him. "Ask. When you come back from Bristol," he said, "would you consider, in whatever shape makes sense, in whatever arrangement works, on whatever terms are right for a woman who has her own life and her own plans, and is not the kind of person who trades one thing for another, coming back not to St. Caro House, but to me?" The East study was very quiet. The spring light was still doing the thing it had been doing with the window. Goldie thought about her mother's kitchen and the slanted floor and the smell of chalk. She thought about 14 students and a classroom and a small room above a school in Bristol that was going to be hers. She thought about a corridor at Carlton House, and a hand and the word spring said quietly against the dark. She thought about what it meant to have a home, not the building, the people in it. "Yes," she said. That is exactly what I would consider." He exhaled, which was the most honest thing she had ever seen him do. "Good," he said. "I'm still leaving in 3 weeks," she said. "I know," he said. "I have already arranged for your trunk to be properly repaired. The latch has been unreliable since November." She stared at him. "You had my trunk repaired?" "I had it examined," he said, with perfect composure. "But the repair happened to follow." "You are," she said, "the strangest man in England." "You have said this before," he said. "I intend to keep saying it," she said. "It keeps being true." He laughed then, a real one, the kind that didn't happen often and meant something when it did. And she thought, watching it, that this was the thing she would carry to Bristol and bring back, not the memory of the ball or the old library or the night it rained, though she would carry those too. This, the specific unrepeatable quality of being in a room with a person who makes you feel, without effort or performance, entirely like yourself. She had gone to London to disappear. She was leaving it, 3 weeks from now, with her name restored, her future clear, her trunk repaired, and a person who would be here when she returned. It was, she decided, an unreasonable amount of good fortune for a woman who had walked into this house 3 years ago with nothing but a borrowed reference and the determination to become invisible. She had become, instead, rather thoroughly the opposite. She found she did not mind at all. If this story made you feel something, drop a comment below. Which moment got you the most? The laugh in the ballroom, the night it rained, the kiss, the trunk, spring. Subscribe for more stories like this one.